Welcome once again to another installment of Games You Might Not Have Tried, where we showcase video games that aren't always good, but they... Zoe, I told you I'd help you farm Riven mods later. Oh, gotcha. Well, everyone, it seems today we'll be taking a break from video games and tackling some tabletop role-playing games instead. Because, as I've just been informed, today we have esteemed RPG designer Eddie Webb with us. He's worked on tabletop RPGs for almost 20 years and played some games even James hasn't heard of. So get your dice and notebooks ready, because we're going to go on some adventures you might not have tried. Dungeons and Dragons is making a... Wait, what did I say? No, Really? No. Okay, restart. Dungeons and Dragons is more popular than ever these days, and D&D is great. But you know, mac and cheese is also great, but I wouldn't want to eat that for every meal. So I, your humble game master, will talk about a few tabletop games that might not be on your radar yet. Keep in mind, though, our usual rules apply. The games on this list aren't necessarily good, but they're definitely quirky, unique, or just super interesting for a designer. So let's start with a way to play D&D style games without using D&D. Dungeon World. Using the popular, powered by the Apocalypse engine, Dungeon World flips the traditional fantasy dungeon crawling experience into a story where the players help shape the world. For example, if you search for secret doors and succeed, well, there's a secret door, even if there wasn't one previously. The actions of the characters shape the dungeon being explored, which results in a game that feels both familiar and very different. However, if you're looking for a different kind of fantasy, you should check out Cavaliers of Mars. This swashbuckling pulp fantasy game is set in a fantasy sci-fi version of Mars, with cities built on the canals of the Red Planet. The motivations are particularly exciting from a design perspective, because every dice roll you make in this game to take any action incorporates one of three motivations: for honor, for love, or for self, which means your chances of success change with why you're trying to take the action. It forces players to always assess their motivations for every action. And from an RPG perspective, I find that kind of refreshing. King Arthur, Pendragon. Now, this is an older game, and the mechanics can feel a bit dated, but it's amazingly well researched. One of the central designs of the game are paired personality traits that players sometimes need to roll against to take or avoid certain actions. Both traits add up to 20, so adding a point to, say, chaste, means you have to remove a point from lustful. It's fairly intricate and maybe a little too fiddly for a modern gamer, but it feels incredibly true to classic Arthurian adventures. Castle Falkenstein. Let's jump ahead in time a bit to the steampunk world of Castle Falkenstein. This game is set in a fantasy version of the Victorian era, where players use playing cards instead of dice to accomplish things. The use of playing cards is compelling, because it forces players to decide which cards to hang on to and which to get rid of, adding a bit of card game strategy to an RPG. Combine that with an unusual approach to the setting that breaks the fourth wall quite a bit, and you have a game that feels fresh, even though it was published 20 years ago. De Profundis. This is another historical game with fascinating mechanics. It's one of many games set in the Cthulhu mythos, but this one is done entirely by writing letters. Players write letters back and forth to each other and to the game master, building up a collaborative world of inevitable horror. And keep in mind, we're talking about physical, handwritten letters here, because the physical act of creating these letters and waiting for your correspondence to arrive is a big part of the experience. Katanas and Trenchcoats. Now we're speeding up again to just before the modern day, as we take a look at this lightweight urban fantasy parody. Although written only a few years ago, the game is a send-up on the tragic monsters fighting in a secret underground war genre that was so popular in the 1990s. Now, it's incredibly hard to do comedic tabletop RPGs correctly, but this game pulls it off by skewering the tragic and grimdark action while making the game actually playable and compelling. Not to mention, the core game is a slim 25 pages of bombastic style, so it's surprising to find some actual substance underneath. Tenra Bansho Zero. TBZ is a game featuring samurai, Taoist sorcery, and giant robots. But underneath the kitchen sink anime setting is the karma system. It works like this. Players get tokens from other players for doing cool or entertaining things in-game. These get spent in a variety of ways, but their main function is to generate points you can use to enhance dice rolls, as well as change your emotional relationship with other characters. But all the points you spend convert to karma, which is bad. If you ever reach 108 karma, your character becomes a lost soul and is immediately retired. Now, it's more complex than that, not to mention it's sometimes harder to understand due to the translation, but once you wrap your head around it, it's a fascinating system of inevitable consequences. Ryudama. Ryudama is a game where you play as the kind of characters that are usually reserved for NPCs in most other fantasy games. You know, like bakers, farmers, shopkeepers, and the like. The game has a strong emphasis on travel over combat, which makes it a great game for people not used to playing tabletop RPGs. A really fascinating bit, though, is the half-dragon guardian spirit non-player character that watches over the travelers. Not only does the GM use it to give the players benefits like spells and other abilities, but the players also invest into the character, shaping it to suit their needs and playstyle. Also, players end up making the towns they visit, along with some of the townspeople. So the player characters always have a friend they can look forward to seeing. This is a game that gets the word heartwarming attached to it a lot. Oh, good call, Zoe. So if heartwarming games are your thing, I would really be remiss if I didn't recommend Eddie's own game, Pugmire. It's a fantasy adventure starring dogs and cats set after the apocalypse. I know someone here is pretty excited about that. So if that sounds up your alley, you should totally check it out at the link below. So with that, we end our first Games You Might Not Have Tried Tabletop Edition. Please let us know in the comments if you'd like us to do more episodes like this in the future. And while you're there, tell me what character you're gonna roll, because I've got some boss dice that are waiting to roll crits. Oh, critical fumble.